Good morning. I am here with the lovely Sherril Harris, who believes that personal and professional growth isn't about acquiring more knowledge. It's about cultivating a practice of questioning everything you already know. Through her Be the Water, Not the Rock approach to solving people problems, Sherril teaches us how to look inward, to find and remove the resistance holding the problem so we can respond from choice. A dynamic speaker, Sherril is a social and emotional intelligence expert, ICF certified professional life and leadership coach with additional certifications in positive psychology, the science of happiness, and applied neuroscience and brain health. Sherril will be speaking to us today about the 3 emotional intelligence hacks for transforming difficult conversations. Thank you so much for being here, Sherril.
Thank you for having me, Randy. I'm absolutely delighted.
Well, I'm thrilled to hear you, and I'm going to let you take over now, and I'm going to disappear.
Beautiful. All right, so I'm going to launch my PowerPoint. So I've got some cool things for you guys to look at while I am chatting with you. All right, there we go. So, as Randy said, I'm Sherril Harris. Welcome, everybody. I am zooming in today from beautiful Florida. If you're not familiar with Florida, it's the place where if you've ever heard anything crazy on the news, it's happened here. Now, as Randy said, I am an IPEC certified professional life and leadership coach. I've also got some certifications in applied neuroscience. And I've also got some additional certifications that are sort of interesting. Would you believe there's an actual science of happiness? So it was a lot of fun to get that one. And some of what I learned today, I'll be sharing with you. Some of what I learned, I'll be sharing with you today. I am in a binational marriage. My husband is a Frenchman. I am an American, as you can probably tell from my non-accent. We spend our time in Sarasota, in Brussels, Belgium, which is our primary residence, and then also in Paris. So I share that with you because when we're talking about conflict, as we'll see today, very often conflict stems from misunderstanding. Things are said, they're interpreted differently by the listener than was the intention of the speaker. And when you are in a relationship with somebody whose first language is not the same as your own, that can happen a lot. Now, I want to start where we all start in childhood. None of us is ever taught how to correctly manage crisis. And when we evolve into adulthood, it's sort of by happenstance that we handle conflict any way that we handle it. So as a child, you are observing what's being done around you. You're collecting data on what you've tried that may have worked or not worked in the past. And some of that data is also going to be biased because even if it served you, even if it helped you get your needs met, it wasn't necessarily the best way to manage the crisis. So I was really seeking a way to do it better as I entered into adulthood. I was watching what was going on around me and deciding that I wanted to have a bigger, better life for myself. And what I noticed is the most successful people I knew seemed to be able to manage conflict and crisis really well. So I wanted to know what they knew. And so at first, I can't tell you that I was smart enough that I was pursuing this for professional use. I just wanted to be able to find my way in the world and navigate situations that didn't feel comfortable to me. And that's how it sort of happens for everybody. I'm always excited to bring this little short course out because I think of all the things that we can learn at the youngest possible age, this is probably the most useful knowledge you can have, how to manage conflict. Randy may have mentioned that I've sort of got my own philosophy for this. It's called Be the Water, Not the Rock. And the impetus for my journey to figure out how to manage life's resistance was first managing the resistance within myself, because we all have a voice in our head. And very often, it's not what's happening in front of us that's generating the conflict as much as what's happening inside of us. So I've come up with this formula that I call Be the Water, Not the Rock. It's a lifestyle and it's also a mantra. And today I'm going to show you how to use it. Now, in a nutshell, being the water is about observing our judgments when we feel triggered, yet being able to flow around them, not getting stopped by them. It's about flexing our listening so we can really hear and understand what's creating the rub for somebody. And then it's about choosing words that invite instead of incite. And I'm sure everybody on this Zoom today has been in a situation where someone has chosen a word in a moment of heated conflict, and that word literally hijacked the entire conversation. My favorite example of this is always and never. If you've ever been in an argument with somebody and they said, you always, and a part of your brain goes, what? Wait, do I always do that? Is that true? And before you know it, you're completely off track on what you were originally having the disagreement about. And now you're debating the accuracy of always or never. So being the water, not the rock, helps us to avoid those kind of mistakes. I'm going to outline 7 steps that I feel are the most effective route from conflict and resistance to being back in the flow. And today we're going to go through each of the steps, but I'm only going to take a deep dive into several of them because I promised you 3 hacks. And the 3 hacks that I have on tap for you today are 3 things to remember that you can bring into any conversation right after listening to this, maybe tomorrow, maybe next month. And if you just remember these 3 things instead of trying to remember the 7 steps, I promise you your conversations will transform. So the first is going to be pause and reflect, followed by choose your ideal outcome, acknowledge, listen and invite, validate, respond, and agree on a measurable solution. And then I'm also going to invite you to a bonus today, because as you'll see, the bonus is really pivotal to the hacks that I'm going to be sharing with you today. Acknowledge and validate, because really, we can never do enough of that. So let's begin with pause and reflect. Pause and reflect is all about being triggered. Now, I'm a believer, and perhaps some of you are as well, that your triggers can be your teachers, but we can't learn anything when we're triggered. So something has happened. I like to call them ambushes. You walked into a situation, maybe an upset customer, you were called into the scenario with the upset customer, or a coworker walks up to your desk and they're very upset by something, or you get ambushed by your teenager in the kitchen. They say something, and that something generates a stimulus in you. It's very hard for us to respond intentionally when we have that kind of emotion going on in us. You see, the problem is when people get reactive, we just stop listening. And it's the uncertainty of the situation, the out of controlness of it that makes us feel uncomfortable, vulnerable, and unsafe. We start looking for the exits or feeling attacked. And then the next thing you know, instead of responding to a human being in distress, we start reacting from our judgments about them. And we're going to talk about judgment a little more later on down the line here. So instead of seeking to resolve their discomfort, when we get emotionally hijacked, the focus shifts to how can we resolve our own. And very often, that's where people sort of lose the path, so to speak. Now, emotional hijacking was coined, of course, by Daniel Goleman, who's considered sort of the godfather of emotional intelligence. And when we're under the influence of an emotional hijacking, here's the danger. We decide things and we do things, and this is how garbage in our heads becomes garbage in our lives. So when something happens, we want to pause, no matter how much time you have, whether that pause is, I'm going to go take a walk around the lake and think about this, or I'm going to go sleep on it and get back with you, or in an ambush where you just take a deep breath and give your mind just a moment to reflect and decide the following. The next step, no surprise, is going to be choose your ideal outcome. So you've paused for a moment. You want to choose your ideal outcome. What would be success to you out of this moment of conflict? Now, if you've got time to think about it, I encourage you to come up with something much deeper than what it would appear on the surface. So if this is a conflict with somebody in your personal life, let's say, and I'm just going to make something silly up, it's about somebody putting the toilet seat down, let's say. Instead of just saying, I just wanted to put the toilet seat down, the truth of the matter might be, I would like him to think about my comfort and put the toilet seat down while also understanding that I bring this up because I love him and I love the peaceful life we've built together. So if you have the time, especially in your personal life, to come up with a little bit deeper of an outcome, great. In an ambush, let's say at work with a customer, it might be as simple as, I want to come up with a win-win that will make this customer happy and make me feel good, right? But you got to have something. I'm a big fan of choose a personal ideal outcome, something that is like your branded way you roll in life. For me, it's always about, hey, I'm an end to suffering and a conduit to win-win situations. So when I get ambushed, if I don't have time to go deeper into what my ideal outcome would be, I can reach in my back pocket for that one, and it will always be my North Star. And that really is the purpose of having an outcome. Because as we all know, sometimes in a conflict-driven conversation, we lose track. The back and forth starts happening. We're trying to watch the ball going back and forth across the net, and we forget why we're here. Your ideal outcome is always going to be that point on the map that will guide you to where you're going. Next one, acknowledge. And this brings me to our first hack. Our first hack, create psychological safety. You might say something like, it couldn't have been easy for you to bring this up to me. Or, I can hear how frustrated you are, and anyone in your situation might feel that way. The purpose of acknowledgement is to make that person feel that you are giving them permission to continue the conversation. Because think about when you've been upset in your life and maybe you've lost it. Maybe it's gone to meltdown for whatever reason. As you are melting down, there's a part of you that is anticipating resistance from the other person. There's a part of you that's waiting for that person to say, well, hold on a minute, or yeah, but. And so you're defensive. You're expressing yourself and you're defensive, which is not a very useful posture for somebody to be. So acknowledging and creating psychological safety gives somebody permission to continue expressing themselves. Now, you might think, what do I do if somebody's yelling at me? It feels emotionally violent. I don't want to stand there and receive all this yelling. There's a way to ask somebody to turn the volume down and still feel psychologically safe. It looks like this. So what you have to say is important to me, and I don't want to miss anything. Can I ask you to give it to me with a little less volume so that I don't miss it? Using the word volume instead of yelling takes the judgment out of the conversation. And really, truthfully, that's what you're asking for. You'd like the volume to go down. So you don't have to say to somebody, stop yelling or lower your voice. Let me tell you something. Never in the history of lowering people's voices has telling somebody to lower their voice ever resulted in the actual lowering of a voice. And the same is true for stay calm. So first hack, create psychological safety. Now, one of the things that can get in the way of us creating that psychological safety is something called the fundamental attribution error. And being the water, a big part of being the water is understanding that we're all afflicted with this bias. So the fundamental attribution error, or FAE, very simply put, is our tendency to attribute another person's actions to their character instead of the situation. So looking at this image here, let's say this is my friend Jack, and it seems like Jack is always late. He's that guy that's always coming in, 7 minutes after the meeting started. If this is a problem that needs to be remedied and I'm going to have to speak to Jack, walking into the meeting with the attitude that, Jack's always late because Jack's a slacker, or Jack is really self-involved, or Jack doesn't respect the meetings that I do, or the boundaries of my time, is not a good foot to step off on. That's the fundamental attribution error. Because the truth of the matter is, we don't really know what's generating that situation. But I bet if we sat down with Jack and we deconstructed it, we would be just as likely to find out that there's something circumstantial going on in Jack's life. Maybe Jack is a new father and this is a first child, and he and his wife are having a hard time managing their time in the morning. Maybe Jack is that guy who's so helpful that he always picks up his phone when you call him, even if he's walking right into a meeting. Now, the interesting thing to me about the fundamental attribution error is that when social scientists conducted experiments to measure this, to really understand what it looks like inside of people, they discovered an interesting anomaly. See, we, when we're the one doing the judging, have a tendency to make the attribution error. But when we are the one being judged, we don't. So if we're the one that's always skittering sideways into a meeting 7 minutes in, the chances are in our mind, we're thinking, what's wrong with these people? Do they not understand how much I have on my plate? So without that person's exact mindset and life experiences, the truth is we can't possibly know what we would do in their shoes at that moment. So just give people the benefit of the doubt. To that end, human beings have a tendency to summarize one another based on the 5 minutes we share with them. So your mind gets heated and it goes, hey, you're that kind of person. The walls go up and all other possibilities go out the window. Whatever kind of person you just sum them up as is the way you're going to relate to them, like they are that thing. So I want you to imagine, especially in situations where you're dealing with a stranger, like an upset customer, I want you to understand that you don't know how many dominoes have already fallen before you got there. And there's a real opportunity here because when you think about it that way, you get to be somebody's angel. You get to be the pattern interrupt. Now, my mom and my grandmother were amazing about this, by the way. My mom was that woman. I remember being in a grocery store with her in New Jersey when I was a kid, and some woman was going off on her kids. She had like 3 children under 5 and a baby in the little seat from the grocery cart, and everybody in the store was turning around looking at her with all this judgment. And my mom walked over, and there was a little kid at this woman's feet. It was screaming and crying. And my mom bent down and picked the little kid up and looked at the woman with so much compassion on her face. And she said, man, it is really hard to be a mom some days. Sometimes I change my name just so my kids can't find me. And she made that woman laugh and smile. And so making the assumption that if you knew more, you would feel differently is always the safest option in conflict. So first hack again, create psychological safety. All right, the next one is listen and invite. Now, the important part of listen and invite here is we want to try to avoid judgment. All right, and that's really tough. And you know why it's tough? Because we are all a bunch of judgy McJudgersons. And I want you to understand why we're so biased. First of all, temperament. There's a lot of discussion in social science and even neuroscience about how much of who you are in terms of temperament is decided at birth. And what are the circumstances before your birth? Everything from genes to what was going on in your mother's biology during the gestation. But all of this discussion, it's safe to assume right now, at least until we know more, that about 50% of who we are is determined at birth. Then you've got your upbringing. Your upbringing here, if you're in the United States, might look a little different than somebody's upbringing in Canada or somebody's upbringing in England or somebody's upbringing in South Africa. Culture, while we're talking about it. I'm from New Jersey. I spent 10 years in Tulsa. Now, let me tell you something. In New Jersey, I'm considered pretty soft on my delivery. But when I first moved to Tulsa, people kept saying, are you from New York? And I couldn't figure this out. I'm like, I don't sound like I'm from New York. Why do people think I'm from New York? Well, I found out later that Tulsans were a little biased against New Yorkers. Their assumption about New Yorkers is that they were always a little gruff, and they were interpreting me as a little gruff. So they made the assumption I'm from New York. So culture can shape how we see the world. Then there's our experiences, what you've seen, what you've heard about from your friends. It may not have happened to you, but it happened to somebody you know. And with each of those things, you're making decisions about the world, and that's shaping your worldview. Then there's all the unhelpful things you picked up from all the people trying to be helpful, and all the unhelpful things you picked up from people who were definitely not trying to be helpful. Think about as a child, maybe if you had a parent that said, when somebody hits you, hit them back. Doesn't work as well when you're a grown up, and it really doesn't work as well when you're a kid either. But I know a lot of people that grew up in families where that was the conventional wisdom. Or maybe you got picked on in school and you looked at the kids who did the picking on and you made a mental note of what they did not to get picked on. And then here you are, an adult, deciding that that's how you're going to do life. Whatever experiences you've had have left a lasting mark, and that mark has created a filter, and you're seeing the world through that filter. It's even your biology at a particular moment. So somebody comes at you with conflict on a day when, I don't know, you're starting to come down with a fever and you didn't sleep well last night, or you're hungry. There's some great data out there about a study. It's called the Hungry Judge Study that seemed to suggest that judges make different rulings after lunch than they would have made right before. So they're drawing a correlation between the way they are perceiving these cases on a hungry stomach versus a full one. So lots of things contribute to how we're feeling about any given situation. And as a result, we have lots of different interpretations. Here's what we need to remember. There's the truth with a capital T, and then there's just what's true for you. Don't let what's true for you get in the way. We want to approach with curiosity instead of from judgment. The brain makes these mental shortcuts. They're called heuristic shortcuts. And what they do is, in our most primitive form, when our only job was to stay alive, it was very useful when we were outrunning a dinosaur or marauding raiders to be able to make quick decisions based on what we saw in the past. So at that particular moment, when you're outrunning the dinosaur, it was not helpful to remember how great Joe threw the spear that one day. But it is really helpful to remember how, June didn't throw the spear fast enough. So our mind begins equipping us with all of these mental shortcuts. And these are the kind of things that block curiosity. So by choosing curiosity, by looking at the situation in front of us, like we've never been in this situation before with this person ever, is where all the power lies. That's what's turning on our curiosity. And the truth of the matter is, we never have been. Even when you keep having the same argument with somebody, it's not really the same argument. The first time you had that argument, it was a different set of feelings for the person coming at you. If this is the 15th time you've had that argument, you are not talking to the same person. So curiosity gives us the power to be able to find the truth underneath our pile of evidence to the contrary. All right. That brings us to validate. In psychology, we define validation as finding the common truth in what we feel and think, the essence of which communicates to another that their responses make sense and are understandable within their life context or situation. That's validation. This brings me to hack number 3. Normalize and empathize. Here's why. Listen to this. Thanks for sharing that. Anyone in your position might feel that way. Or, hey, I'm really sorry you had to go through that. Do you see, if you were the receiver, how that made you feel? I got a great story about this. I went through a customer service dilemma with a boot company that is now defunct. And I think it was my sixth or seventh phone call to this particular company. I finally got somebody who understood how to normalize and empathize. And so I told him my story, and I probably told him my story in a very rude way because I was frustrated at this point. And it was amazing what he said to me. He went, "Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? I cannot believe we put you through that." And immediately all the fight went out of me. I had found my person. Because when you get this far in the conversation where somebody has bared their soul to you, they're in a really vulnerable place. And the quicker you can normalize and empathize, the greater the likelihood you're going to have access to so many different choices you can make that's going to make them happy and also make you happy. So that brings us to respond. You're going to respond and you're going to stick with I messages. A lot of people get to respond and they go, "Well, you did this and you did that and our company policy and no, 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 no." You got to stick to the I messages. You want to be able to convey to the person that you heard them and you understood them. Responding might mean asking some additional questions. "Hey, I heard you say this. Did I get that right?" Or "Help me understand what you meant when you said this." The best thing you can do in responding is ask more questions so you can be absolutely certain you understand what's going on. Agree on a measurable solution. I gotta tell you, this one is a sticky wicket. I have gone into so many companies over the years and mitigated situations where there's been conflict around somebody did exactly what they were told to do and still got told in their review that they didn't do it. And every single time, the problem has always been the lack of specificity. So I remember one time I was negotiating a conflict between a manager and employee in a car service department. And this employee had been summed up as being very resistant, very difficult. And the manager couldn't understand why he couldn't understand what "meet the customer warmly" means. Well, remember those biases we talked about earlier? The way you were raised, the experience you had, the culture you were born into. This young man didn't understand what that meant. Greet the customer warmly through his filter for life looked different than the expectation the manager had. So if you work your way down through a conflict to the place of agreement where you're going to put things in place that are going to remedy the situation, make sure behavior is different going forward, you want to be very specific. In this case, we walk this young man through the specific measurable steps. When a customer pulls up, you greet them on the curb. You open the car door for them. You reach in and shake their hand. If it's a woman, you help them out of the car. Da 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 da. Please be specific. You will see it go so much smoother. All right, that brings us to the bonus round. Acknowledge and validate some more. You can never go wrong with acknowledging and validating. Let me tell you why. Some of you may be familiar with this. This is Maslow's hierarchy of need. It was created by a social scientist named Abraham Maslow in 1943 for the Journal of Psychological Review. And Maslow's hierarchy of need describes 5 levels of needs that motivate human nature. Okay. Now, notice how big on the platform safe and security is. That includes psychological security. Remember the first tag, create psychological security? And when you add to that impressive need, that large need that we have for emotional security, consider this. Human beings have a bias. It's called a negativity bias. And you've probably experienced this yourself. You can have a day where 5 things went really well and 1 thing went really crappy. And when you get home and your loved ones say, "So how'd it go today?" the chances are you're going to start with a crappy thing. Or you're going to remember maybe 1 or 2 of the good things. And then as everybody goes, "Oh, that's awesome," you're going to segue to go, "Now, wait a minute. Now let me tell you what happened." Again, going back to the days when we were outrunning dinosaurs or marauding raiders, it was very useful to notice the negative first. That was going to be the thing that kept you alive. But now, when we don't have the dinosaurs and marauding raiders, where the most uncomfortable thing we're having to deal with maybe is a grumpy coworker, we need a way to beat the bias. So there's been a lot of research around this to keep in your back pocket. Whenever you give somebody a criticism or a negative, you want to back that up with 5 positives. In business, the ratio is 3-to-1. So when you're having a difficult conversation, you can never acknowledge and validate enough. That's helping the person that you're dealing with beat their bias. Which brings me to the end. Let's go over our 3 hacks for being the water, shall we? First one, create psychological safety. Make it okay for them to be there. Let them know, hey, I'm climbing in the pot with you. You're in safe hands. Number 2, listen with curiosity, not judgment. The more curious you are, the more your possibilities for a solution are going to open up for you. If you've got a judgment there, you're pretty much going to push it to the outcome you expected. So if you want to be surprised, lean in and ask yourself, what do I really want to know about what's going on here? And you will be amazed with the solutions that seem to almost fall out of trees. And then finally, normalize and empathize. When somebody gets to the end of their story, when they get to the end of their bluster, when they get to the end of their vent, because we've all been on the receiving end of a good vent, right? Normalize and empathize. Let them know, hey, in my own way, I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt. You're safe with me. I hear you. And this is how you be the water and not the rock. I'm going to leave you with one last thing. For business, meltdowns are money. If people are melting down at your business, they're trying to give you valuable information. If you choose not to listen to it, it's going to cost you money. I would have never done business with that boot company again had it not been for that amazing employee who met me where I was at. Meltdowns are also money because instead of going out and hiring a consultant like me to come in and tell you what's going on with your customer experience, if you really pay attention to the angriest of your customers, you're going to find out with very few exceptions, they're telling you exactly where your opportunities are. Fix those things that are creating the rub and watch your whole customer experience shift. And at home, conflict is currency. At home, what you're trying to get is trust and love and respect. And so when somebody's upset with you in your personal life, that's when you really want to lean in. That's when you really want to make it safe. That's when you really want to ask more and more and more questions. Because here's the thing. Human beings are always changing. And if somebody's been in your life a long time, they're not the person they were when you met them. Conflict gives us an opportunity to reintroduce ourselves to one another on a deeper level. And one of my favorite quotes I'll leave you with from Brene Brown: what we know matters, but who we are matters more. Being rather than knowing requires showing up, letting ourselves be seen. It requires us to dare greatly and to be vulnerable. When somebody's in a conflict with you, they're in a vulnerable place. Meet them where they are. Show up with a little bit of vulnerability, and you will be surprised what you can create together. I'm Sherril Harris, and this has been 3 emotional intelligence hacks for transforming difficult conversations.
Fantastic, Cheryl. Love it. You did a
Thank
great
you.
job. Great examples and discussion. Being a conscious and active listener is so important for a relationship, for a conversation, for business, for your personal
Yes.
relationships, like any interaction or communication that you have. It's so important to be an active listener. And one of the things I'm guilty of sometimes as well is multitasking or not giving full attention. You don't take in all the information. Your brain is like all over the place. So definitely a good suggestion to be doing as well is really focusing in on the person that you're speaking with so that you're hearing them, but then also validating what you think they said
Yes.
to verify that, yes, you heard correctly, right? So now you can respond correctly.
And have you ever been in that situation where at first you didn't hear them correctly? I do this to my poor husband all the time. I heard what I heard, and now I've gone down that track. And then he's like, whoa, 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 wait, 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 wait. So we're all guilty of that in today's busy world.
Yeah, but just like you just said, like, if he's saying, wait, 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 that means you got it all wrong. You misinterpreted what he was trying to say, or his communication wasn't clear, or whatever, whatever the reason, doesn't matter. The point of it is that you heard one thing, he was trying to deliver a different thing, and now he gets to stop you in your tracks so that you don't spiral off somewhere,
Yes.
which could be negative or positive, and actually be able to understand what he was trying to say, right?
And because he loves me, he can do that. But when you're dealing with a stranger, if they go, whoa, 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 we go into karate mode. We're like, what?
Yeah.
You're disrespecting me.
Yeah.
So yeah, more than ever, that taking a moment. And that's what I meant earlier when I said with those 7 steps, sometimes they can move around because sometimes you got to pause and reflect a couple of times in a conversation to make sure you don't lose the thread.
Yeah. And it's so important, for your personal relationships and especially for your business relationships, because the last thing you want to do is be burning bridges or losing clients or whatnot, or great relationships, referral relationships that could damage your business. So definitely important to have good, clear communication. Thank you so much for sharing
My
this with us.
pleasure. Thank you for having me. I hope that your audience finds it useful.
Well, thank you. Do you want people to get in touch with you? If so, how
I
can they
would
do
love
that?
that. The best way to get in touch with me is SherrilHarris.com. That's my website. I have an odd spelling to my first name, Sherril, 2 R's, 1 L. It will either direct you to the website or it will direct you to LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out to me if you are interested in speaking. I do mostly speaking now at this point, but I also do a lot of workshops. 2024 is a year where a lot of people are reaching for that little bit of extra conflict management in their companies. And so I love creating those kind of tools for folks.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, that's awesome. So please connect with Sherril. Thank you again, Sherril, for a fabulous presentation. I look
My
forward to
pleasure.
next time.